Welcome to the UFO Woman Show. I'm your host, Melisa Kennedy, and we are going to talk about a subject matter that many of you may not know anything about, or if you do, maybe you think it could be so absurd that there's no way that this could be true. But I'm here to tell you that today's topic is going to be about whether or not Earth is an alien holographic world. Now I know you're sitting there thinking, Melisa, you've lost it. But have I? If I said to you a year ago that we would all be in the middle of a worldwide pandemic and we would be wearing masks and sporting events would be closed and schools would be shut down and churches would be closed, you probably would have said, Melisa, you're crazy. Or maybe you would have even called me a conspiracy theorist. Well, would I have been? Or would I have been correct? And I'm even going to make another point. If you had been back in the 1920s and there was one single theory that there was one galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, and if I had said in the 1920s that actually there were millions, if not trillions, of galaxies, you would have said, Melisa, you're crazy, or you're a conspiracy theorist. But we now know that there are millions, if not trillions, of galaxies. And I'm even going to take it back further to biblical times. If you had been there and when Noah was going around and collecting animals for his ark, and he was talking about a great flood coming, they called him crazy or a conspiracy theorist until it started to rain. So friends, folks, I want you to sit back. I want you to have an open mind today. And I want you to think about what we are going to talk about as another theory about whether or not Earth is a hologram. Is it a virtual reality? Who and what could have made our Earth a hologram or a holographic world? And we're going to discuss all the different theories, all the different ideas. And I just want you to have an open mind. And so with that, I want to read to you a quote from Don Juan, and it says, quote, "We are perceivers, we are awareness, we are not objects, we are not solidity, we are boundless. We forget this, and thus we entrap the totality of ourselves in a vicious circle from which we rarely emerge in our lifetime." So friends, I want you to think about that quote during our current situation in the world today, and I want us to start to think beyond the box that we have all been put in as to what our reality truly is and how we can break free from this firewall of reality that we've all been put into. So with that, I'm going to introduce my two friends again. I have Edgar and I have Kevin here, co-authors with me on our book, Tap into Universal Energy. And actually, this whole topic does talk about and discusses universal consciousness, how it affects our reality, and if in fact this world that we live in is a virtual reality, and we're going to talk about how the different theories actually support that. So, speaking of theories, we got to talk about science, Edgar. And with your experience in the Air Force and your science background, what are some theories about the world being a holographic world would you like to start us out with today?
Well, the United States Air Force wound up developing heads-up displays where everything's in the helmet of the fighter pilot. And this was technology that's been being worked on for the last 30 years. And it is now reality to the point to where one pilot can control a fighter aircraft.
Wow.
Completely with thought. And they have been working on this for some time. IBM was also working on computer chips using brain cells, and so was Motorola. And this was all back in the late 80s into all the way through the 90s. And they have now come up with virtual reality type chips.
Wow. So the virtual reality type chips that you're talking about, Edgar, really is using consciousness as the form of control or power or the source. Well, that's interesting because, as we all know, there's a lot of video games out there right now that use the virtual reality, and we're getting better and better at it. So I wonder, as we increase our technology, as we become better at virtual reality, could that virtual reality perhaps become the real reality? Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Well, I can share my thoughts from the information that my ET guides have given me, and they did tell me that the universe is holographic in nature. Our world is holographic. We create our reality using thought energy and conscious energy. And conscious energy is the universal life form throughout the universe. That's what they told me. So that fits into your idea that we are a holographic world here. But what they're saying, the whole universe is holographic in nature, it's pure energy and it's projected. And the only thing that stops us from developing further are our thoughts. Our thoughts create that reality. If you want to do something, if you want to make something, you have to have a thought first before you do anything. So I would agree. Well, I know because they've told me. In fact, it was one of the first lessons they gave me on. I've got a folder of all the information they've given me, and it's scribbled on the front and back folder of my actual folder itself. And so, yeah, I'm confident we live in a holographic universe. We create our own reality using thought and consciousness.
Well, that's an interesting point that you make, Kevin, because, we've been talking about universal consciousness. So now I'm wondering, when we ask ourselves who or even what has created this holographic world that we call Earth, could it be possibly an extraterrestrial race that's created it? Could it possibly be our consciousness, our collective universal consciousness that has created this reality that we perceive as the real world? What do you think?
My personal opinion is that reality is created through consciousness itself. As I said earlier, that's the true life form of the universe. And consciousness creates. We're able to create because we have thought, we have a brain, and we create. I spoke to a small group yesterday. I wasn't actually speaking to them, but I was watching a YouTube where someone was bending some forks and knives, and I could speak about it later, but he was using consciousness, conscious energy to bend the fork and spoon, and I tried it and I was able to do it.
Oh, that's so cool.
I mean, that's just amazing. But if we get time later, I can discuss the whole thing.
Okay.
But yes, thought, consciousness, that is the true life of the universe.
And that's a little bit what you were talking about last week, Edgar. You were talking about how mind over matter, you were able to actually walk on glass because you thought that you could.
That's right. You raise your vibrational energies, and since we are pure thought, we are pure energy, we can manipulate anything and walk through walls. It's just that we are set into a time frame of a lower vibration where all this seems solid and real. When in reality, in the grand cosmos, we're no bigger than a grain of sand.
That's an interesting thought. So if we are a grain of sand, is it a possibility, guys, that we could be an atom? Could we be part of an atom? Could this entire existence that we perceive is real? Could it be that we are all just part of an atom? Edgar, what are your thoughts?
We could be part of an atom, or we could be an electron, we could be a neutron, proton. It just goes on endlessly. And that brings up a point about the Truman Show.
Yes, the movie The Truman Show. How many have seen that? Yes, let's talk about The Truman Show. That was a good movie if you haven't seen it, and it kind of brings home the point that we're making today. So let's elaborate on that, Edgar.
Well, in The Truman Show, he starts out being born on a movie set. And as it progressed, he became a toddler, but he was never allowed to leave that movie set. So this was the only world that he knew about until the very end, when they have a great storm on this movie set, and he realizes, oh, there's a backdrop here, and he walks out the back door of the movie set and into the real world and liberated himself from the show.
He liberated himself from the show. Huh. As we collectively laugh, because we're all thinking the same thing. So if we want to change reality, if we want to change the current state of the world that we are in, and listen closely, we can do it collectively through our consciousness and through a place of your heart, through a place of love. We can actually make the changes that are needed to be made. And as long as we are having this tunnel vision, we will stay in the current situation that we're in. So Kevin, I'm going to bring it back to you.
Well, I would make a comment on Edgar's comment about the Truman Show. I've actually met the person who was Truman. Mm-hmm. Okay, not the actor, the real person.
The real person?
The real person.
Oh my gosh.
I met him, and I'd heard of the Truman Show then, so I didn't know who he was. And it was at a conference, and he spoke about it, and since then I've watched it. But it affected him quite deeply in relation to his emotions. He hadn't been able to develop them because he was brought up in this unreal world that was created for him. It was a big experiment. He didn't know. So we had a huge discussion about emotions, and it was very interesting to see that we are molded by our emotions. We are molded by our surroundings. So yeah, very interesting, and it was fascinating to talk to. So in fact, I've thought about it the other week. He did give me some notes on something. I'll have to dig them out, and perhaps we can discuss them at a future.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Well, it's interesting, the concept of that movie, because it kind of showed what we're talking about. I mean, he thought that what he was experiencing was his real world. So if we all think that what we're experiencing is the real world, and perhaps it isn't, then we do have the power to change the perception. And the perception that we all believe is the real world is actually just a very small tunnel vision of what is real. And when we start to awaken ourselves, when we start to raise our vibration, we kick ourselves out of that little tunnel firewall of existence, and we start to think and feel and see things beyond reality that we have been told is reality.
I would agree entirely with that. My reality includes my deceased family members going back 300 years. Mm-hmm. My reality includes extraterrestrials. My reality includes extraterrestrials from different dimensions. But because I've interacted with these people, my reality is different from yours.
Exactly.
You may not see your deceased family members. You may not be able to communicate with them. But I use consciousness itself as an energy, as a conduit for communication, a conduit for travel, and a conduit for co-creation. And I agree entirely with you. We are now in a position, because we are being awakened, to co-create a new society, a society we can co-create with the extraterrestrials, a society we desire for our children, for our future generations, which will include the ETs. And I know they will share their technologies with us, and they will improve our reality. A shared consciousness. So I agree entirely with what you're saying. But I have evidence to support it in relation to all the information I've been given. And I say my reality is totally different to other people's realities. So.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, when we talk about your reality versus my reality versus Edgar's reality, although the three of us are really good friends and we have a lot of commonalities, our reality is perceived a little bit different. And that's the point that I want to make. Just because one person's reality is different than your own doesn't mean that we should label that person as crazy, as a conspiracy theorist. I have been a victim of that, and I'm sure both of you have as well. Anytime you come out and you state something that is against the norm or against the perceived reality, that's the label that everybody wants to throw on you. Let's face it, we come into this world with a preset amount of labels. Your race, your gender, your social and economic status, and then, of course, our educational level, and we just want to keep putting these labels on things. Well, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe what we should do is look at the perceived reality as one that we can actually change for the better, for the good of humanity and Mother Nature. So I love the fact that, you know, you're talking about the extraterrestrials as your perceived reality. And that's great, because that's, again, getting outside that box, getting outside of that third dimensional thinking that we keep getting shoved into, because that's the way to control the thought process of the masses. Once we break out of that, we break through the barriers, and we can start to expand into a more cosmic, more intergalactic awakening, which is what we need to do to break the cycle.
That's correct.
Yes.
We have to break the cycle, and this is what the awakening is all about, breaking the cycles of what was in the past.
What was in the past? So past mistakes, past lives, if you want to even throw that into the mix, and how we can correct those mistakes, learn from those mistakes, not erase them, but rather learn from those mistakes, and then create the new reality, which is one that is of good-natured and not one of control and one of, you know, bad intent, if you will. So if aliens or extraterrestrials or intergalactic, whatever name you want to call this, were to make a holographic world or holographic copy of Earth, why would they do that, and how would they keep it sustained? Edgar?
Well, a number of ways they could keep it sustained is by putting the illusion into our thought processes, into our very energy, because we're pure energy, we're pure frequency. These shells we call bodies are only shells for our spirit to preside in this environment.
So if you were a alien race that wanted to create a holographic world, what would be some reasons to do that, Kevin?
Oh, that's a very good question. I haven't thought about that. Reasons for doing that. Well, I mean, it's an excellent reason for controlling people. You give them limited information, limited knowledge, and then they cannot expand beyond that. I do know that my ET guides have the ability to read my thoughts. They have the ability to give me thoughts. They've demonstrated that to me many times. I'm able to communicate with them telepathically at any given time if I attract their attention, and that's just, again, using consciousness. And I'm aware that they're monitoring us all the time. Their technologies far exceed us. They develop spiritually far beyond what we have. They don't speak to one another. They all use telepathic communication. They all heal themselves, again, using conscious energy. And as Edgar said, we are just pure energy. And I always think of myself as two parts, my physical and my spiritual. And we exist together. And when the physical dies, we go back to the higher levels of consciousness. And it's interesting, but I think that within our holographic universe or within our holographic world, there are different levels of the consciousness. And depending on where you are, is what you see, what you understand, and how you grow. So, but it all comes back to consciousness itself, conscious energy, like Edgar said. So.
Absolutely. Well, so, okay, let's play with this for just a second. If there were an alien race that created or copied Earth for its own holographic purposes, for the purpose of control, could there be another or several other races of extraterrestrials that are of the good kind that are actually trying to help us awaken to break free from the prison planet or the matrix, if you want to call it that? What are your thoughts on that? Is that a possibility, Edgar?
That is a dead possibility. Because this is why we're being awakened, is from the positive side of things, the yin yang. The yin yang has gotten so far out of balance that now it has to be rebalanced again. And we're in that shakedown to trying to rebalance the yin yang.
Well, things have to die or have to go away in order for the rebirth to happen.
That's correct.
So, in some sense, you could even say what's happening in the world today is a shakedown. It is a way of tearing things down to rebuild it back up again. Would you agree with that statement?
Just like a snake shedding its skin.
Like a snake shedding its skin. In order for the new birth to happen, you have to get rid of the old.
That's correct.
And that's an interesting concept, because in a holographic or a virtual reality, take the video games for example, could it be a possibility that the virtual reality games that we now have and the technology is getting so advanced that possibly the coding from the virtual reality is bleeding into our perceived reality, and therefore the blending of the two, the violence and whatnot, the blending of the two is perhaps where these lines get blurred between what our perceived reality is and what the virtual reality is, and once we see it for what it is, we can break out of it.
Again, I would agree with what you're saying there, Melisa. I was shown by my ET guides, you mentioned the Matrix, they called it the Matrix. It's a honeycomb hexagonal net around the Earth. And they also said that we are a prison planet. So that goes along with what they've told me. And they've shown me the Matrix from both sides. But my understanding of that Matrix now and the prison, it's not a physical prison, it's a spiritual prison. It stops us expanding. I'm able to leave my body and go and travel wherever I want to go, but because I've been shown how to do that. But I believe that Matrix stops us from doing that, and that is a prison that keeps us in this reality, as it were, so we're not able to expand our reality. If we can remove that Matrix, or as I can do, I can travel through that Matrix and go anywhere I want. But they've made a specific point of that, giving me the information. And again, I've written that down in my notes. I have a date and time when they give me this information. But it's strange that you bring that topic up and use exactly the same words that they've given to me. So
Probably not an accident.
Probably not an accident. Probably not.
None of this is, by accident. It is all
In divine order.
exactly. So, okay. So this Matrix that we speak of, for those of you that have seen the movies, the Matrix really explains it quite well, illustrates our point very, very nicely. If you haven't seen those movies, basically what we're talking about, which is what Kevin just said, is there are ways to break through. Now, you actively do this all the time, Kevin, through your remote viewing. And we've touched on this in previous episodes of the UFO Woman Show. And Edgar, I know that you also do some various things to break through this perceived reality. What are some ways that we can share with our audience? They're listening to this and they're thinking at home, all right, well, Melisa doesn't sound quite crazy. Maybe she does have a little bit of truth to this. And if they're hanging on with us right now and they're questioning, well, what can I do to break out of this perceived reality and awaken myself both spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically? How can I break through this and get myself to that higher dimension? What are some things that they could do, Edgar?
We're the sum of everything. And we have to go in to our own selves and contact our own selves to reach that point of energy in order to raise ourselves to a higher vibration. The demons, the angels, the whatevers what we perceive is the sum of all of our thoughts, all of our being, what we perceive as being good and bad.
Well, in the universe, you have to have a balance of good and bad. I mean, it's the yin and the yang. That's the whole balance of the existence. And so, whether you're talking about negative entities, positive entities, it doesn't matter if it's intergalactics, interdimensions, human beings. I mean, there's good and bad in everything. That's just the facts of life. But what we can do is change the perception and the reality of what we think is Earth and what we think is our current situation. We do have the ability and the power, the superpower, even if you want to use that word, to change all of this. And if you were to take the idea, the notion that a reptilian race, let's say, is keeping Earth a prison planet for their own benefit, we can break through that. We don't have to be stuck. We don't have to have this tunnel vision. We can awaken ourselves by having a higher vibration, by doing these things that we're talking about. We've mentioned it in our book a few times, Tap into Universal Energy, that the three of us wrote. We've talked about how to break through the barriers that have been put on us for years and years and years, going way back thousands of years. And it's this constant cycle, guys, that we keep getting ourselves into, but we can break out of it just by changing our mindset, by changing the intent of what our perceived reality is.
Yes, once you realize the power of thought itself, and if you use meditation to raise your vibrational frequency, look inward, travel inward, because we're just space inside anyway.
And that's such a weird thing to wrap your head around, isn't it? I mean, we're so trained to think that, this is my reality, this is my body, this is my brain. I don't have the power to change anything, but actually we do.
And that would lead me into an experience I had yesterday. I touched on it earlier. I watched a YouTube with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove with New Thinking Aloud. He's got a new live YouTube session now. And he had a guest on there called Sean McNamara. And he was showing people how to bend spoons. When I was a child, I tried to bend spoons. I saw Uri Geller, he was on the TV, and I was unsuccessful at it. So I thought I would join in and try. I'm sat at home, I've got my knife and fork, and it was explained how it was done. And this is really changing the reality, which is what you're talking about. I'm sat there, I'm following the instructions in relation to bending the fork, and the fork bent. I was amazed. And then I picked up the spoon, we did it again, went through the process, and the spoon bent. So I've now got a bent spoon and a bent fork. After watching the video for quite a while, and it was very enjoyable. And then I took the knife and fork, the spoon and fork to my wife and handed them to her. She said, "How have you got on?" So I bent them. I handed them to her, and she threw them on the floor. It was full of static electricity. Where did that come from? I'd only picked up the spoon and bent it and put it back down again. The fork I'd been holding for quite a period of time. But then the interesting thing was, Sean said that very often watches start working when he does these demonstrations. But my watch here hasn't worked for a few weeks. I need to get it repaired. So I set it to the correct time on the computer, and it worked right up until I went to bed last night. I got up this morning and it's not working. But it started working. It worked, kept perfect time. What's the energy that causes that? Also, my wife said, right, you need to straighten the fork and the spoon and put them back in the drawer. So I straightened the fork, put it back in the door. I straightened the spoon, and as I straightened it, it went like putty. And then the end just bent over and fell off.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, it was just amazing. So I've got this broken spoon now on the kitchen table there.
Sandy's probably not happy that you broke one of her spoons.
I said, oh, look at this. But it was, how it was explained by Sean McNamara was the fact that we use conscious energy to alter the matter in the metal to align the molecules to make it weak.
Wow.
I mean, those are not thoughts that we think about.
No, none of us are trained to think like that.
He's now, and some of his people that he's taught, and he said, we can all learn this. He's now bending 5/8 steel bars.
Oh,
And
my gosh.
He explained about a young woman that tried to bend the fork. The first time she failed, second time, third, fourth time she was successful. Now she's bending 5/8 metal bars, steel bars.
Oh, my
I mean, that's just
word.
unbelievable. But that's just explaining exactly what you... And it's quite strange. I watched that yesterday. Well,
Today we talk about it.
To talk about it
Not
today.
a coincidence,
Not
is
a coincidence, no.
No.
So there's lots of knowledge out there that we don't know, and that's the power of thought, power of the collective energy that's around us, drawing in that energy, directing it, focusing it, having the intent, which is what you said.
Yes.
So I'm going to continue practicing my fork bending. I'm just hoping I can do it again. And,
Sandy,
and I
get
need
your
to get my watch
silverware
going.
ready.
I need to get my watch going again. It's stopped
Yes. Oh, my goodness. Well, pretty soon you're not going to have any silverware to eat
I know,
with,
I know.
Kevin.
Sandy's already told me I can't use her knives and forks. I've got to go and buy me all.
I can't say I blame her. Oh, my goodness. Well, that was a great story, and it really hammers home, more of what we're saying. I mean, who would have thought that the perceived, reality that we all think we have is that we can't bend forks and knives, and certainly not steel like you're talking about, but you just proved the point that you can, and you did. And that's kind of the topic of our show today.
And anyone can learn how to do it.
Exactly. So, Edgar, last week you talked about plasma. You talked about black holes. How does plasma kind of integrate into this topic of conversation about holographic worlds? Is that still something that could be a possibility? And if so, how?
Well, plasma, we even have TVs that use what we call plasma screens. It's energy. It's high frequency energy. And in the physical world, we use plasmas to cut thick steel. We can use it to cut stainless steel, aluminum, whatever, without the use of saw blades. We also use high pressure water. But the plasma is unique because it is high frequency vibrating electricity. And it creates a temperature that, if you look into it, is almost like looking into the sun itself. It's that hot. It vaporizes the molecules.
Wow.
Which brought up a point about, there was a science fiction movie, but wasn't really science fiction, and that was Contact, that was written by, let me think, Carl Sagan. And if any, those that have watched the movie Contact, Jodie Foster was asked a question in the congressional hearing if she believed that she had met a person that was like her dad, and she said that it was the way they did it for millions of years, that they did not develop the technology to go out into the vast reaches of space. And as they watched the ball drop through this plasma field that was set up by this machine, it went through in a matter of only 6 seconds. But they had recorded in her reality over 15 hours of static. Is that possible? Yes, that is possible.
It's all in the perceived reality.
It's all in perception.
There we go again. So you mentioned earlier, Edgar, about when you were in the Air Force, they used some virtual reality. Can you talk a little bit more detail about that?
In the aircraft, the old science fiction movies that had these electronic displays that if you focused your head in the center of it, you could see everything around you. But if you moved your head to one side or the other, you could not see it. And that was a heads-up display. Now they've got them in the visors of their helmets, these heads-up displays, where it would be almost technically impossible to have all this gadgetry in front of you and still be able to see out the cockpit of the aircraft. It's now all virtual reality within the helmet, and you're able to control the entire aircraft just with a little joystick.
So kind of like the video games.
Like the video games.
Except real.
Except it's
right?
multi-million-dollar aircraft.
This can get real confusing real quick.
Are we creating a reality within a reality with the reality game?
Within the reality.
And that's what this is all about. And in fact, David Icke talked about that.
Oh yes, I love that guy. He's awesome.
And he's spot on what he has researched and he has put out. And people call him crazy.
Oh, they've ridiculed him.
And he's not crazy.
He's not crazy. Just because it's different than the reality you think is reality doesn't mean it's crazy. We got to get away from that. We really do, because that's keeping us in the box, keeping us in this limited vision. Once we break free, just like I, made the comparisons to a year ago, we never would have thought this was going to happen in our world. 1920, they didn't think that there was anything but just the Milky Way galaxy. And then back in the biblical times, Noah with his ark and gathering all the animals, they thought he was crazy too. They thought this was all conspiracy theories. Guess what? It's not. People want to label people that have different ideas or possibly actually know the truth, and they're actually taking a stand and coming out, and they're brave enough to talk about it like we are on this show, and we are putting out there the information that needs to be put out there. Just because it's different than what everybody believes is the truth doesn't mean it's crazy or a conspiracy theory. It just means that maybe we need to stop thinking about things the same way and still getting the same results. Maybe it's time to break out of that and have some free will and actually expand our minds and wake up from what we are currently in.
And don't forget the power of thought. We talk about ET guides all the time, and if you want to contact them, have the thought, have the intent. If you want to see a craft, have the thought, have the intent. Go outside, sit, meditate, relax in nature, and open the mind. And your reality will change because it allows the other frequencies to come in. And once you learn to do that, there are many now that do the C5 groups globally. And they go outside, they relax, they meditate, and a craft will appear.
Right.
They do that for me anyway, if I ask them normally. Not always, but most of the time. But I have a direct communication. I'm able to, as I said earlier, communicate with the higher vibrational frequencies. Where they communicating across galaxies even, possibly. Mm-hmm. So, change your reality by changing your thought.
Absolutely. And, if you get some like-minded people together that want to do a CE5 event, and what that is a close encounter of the fifth kind, and that is when you get a group of people together that are not skeptic, but are rather like-minded individuals that actually want to have some sort of contact with intergalactics or with some sort of intergalactic craft. When you get a group of people, and we've all done it, amazing things could happen. Now, are they guaranteed to happen? No. But it is a stronger possibility when you get like-minded people together with the same intent to create that event or create that reality. And I think that's really important, because what everybody wants to perceive as normal, maybe we should change what the new normal is and actually start to look at reality in a different way and start to change that reality by inviting our intergalactic families, by thinking beyond just this holographic planet, if you will, and break out of all of this and get higher levels of frequency, higher levels of understanding, awaken our spirits, awaken our minds to a much bigger, more beautiful reality than the one we're currently in.
Yeah, I think that I mentioned last week about that friend of mine who was a skeptic all his life, and he was staying at my house on vacation, and I went to get a couple of beers, and as I got the beers, I said to my ET guides, now would be a good time to show my craft. Okay, so I went back with the beers, and the craft appeared. I told the story last week. But his reality has changed now. He understands that extraterrestrials are here. He understands that they're engaging our planet. He even understands the spiritual side of things now, because he had an out-of-body experience. All from that one experience of seeing a craft, it opened his mind. So his reality has changed. If you'd asked him 2 or 3 years ago, are there such things as extraterrestrials? He said, no, there's no such thing. There's only
Well, he
us.
probably would say you're crazy.
He would. Well, he always thought I was.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's just it. I mean, it's like if we got to get away from the labeling.
Yeah.
We have to. It's not what the human race needs. It's a dividing way of thinking. And we get away from labels of crazy and conspiracy theories and all this other stuff and actually start to open our minds and think outside the box. Then next thing you know, the whole reality of our world, of our existence changes. And that's the point that you made about the Truman Show, the movie, the Matrix movies, all of these, and I'm sure there's other movies we're not thinking of, and probably there's people at home right now saying, well, you're forgetting about so-and-such show or, movie. There's several out there, and a lot of times they're labeled as science fiction, but folks, it's really more like science fact. Would you agree, Edgar?
And it's a change in the paradigm. In order to make the changes in society, we have to change the entire paradigm. And this is the major change that we have to go through. This is an evolution like has not happened in millennia. This is a great awakening. And it's time to embrace that great awakening and meditate and connect with our intergalactic brothers and sisters that's coming here to try to help us, not hinder us. Just like the human race, there are good, there is bad, and there is the indifferent. They're no different. That perception is no different. That's why we are the sum of everything.
Exactly. Well, the notion that ETs, aliens, intergalactics, whatever word you feel comfortable using. I personally like to use the word intergalactics. It's a little more friendly and it's a little less tainted by Hollywood movies. The notion that UFOs, UAPs, spacecraft, aliens, the notion that all of these are here to kill us is all part of the illusion that has been created through movies and Hollywood to further the agenda of the tunnel vision. Now, if you step out of that notion and you start to say to yourself, well, if that was truly the intent, then these aliens, these UFOs, would have killed us a long time ago because, let's face it, they have the technology to do so. So then you have to ask yourself, well, if that's the case, Melisa, that they're not here to hurt us, then how does that play into today's topic, which is Earth as a holographic reality? Is it set forth by kind of a bad alien race? Or is it something else? Maybe it's just a manifestation of universal consciousness. Maybe collectively it created a copy of this Earth, of what it's supposed to be like, which it's no longer like, but maybe it's a replica of what Earth is supposed to be. What do you think about? that, Kevin?
Yes, there's quite a lot in there, isn't there? I've got my head around the holographic universe. I've got my head around how we create using thought and consciousness, because they're energies. The ETs that I've had contact with all my life are benevolent ones. I know there are some bad ETs out there, as Edgar said. There's this yin and yang. So I don't live in a perfect reality, as it were, within the galactic reality which I'm a part of. But however, I'm aware of the different sides. I tend to think that there may be some influence through some extraterrestrials in relation to our reality, but I think we collectively have created that reality as a species. But now, as again Edgar said, we are awakening to the fact that we can change our reality as a collective consciousness, as with the story of the 100 monkeys. I don't know whether we've covered that on our show yet, but that was a small thing where so I think some scientists gave some seed to some monkeys, and they were covered in sand. So the monkeys had to wash the seed in the water to eat it. And then the one that they taught, she then taught her daughter, and then that family taught that family and that family. And then the whole family on the island, if they were given grain, they picked it up, they washed it, and then they ate it. But what happened then, an island some miles away, almost instantly, all the monkeys started washing the grains of food and things in the water. It was a collective consciousness. Nobody showed those monkeys on the other island how to do that. And that's what's happening now with our collective consciousness as we're being awakened. There are more and more people having contact with the ETs, having contact with their deceased family members. I had a friend of mine text me the other day. She said her father had just passed away after a long illness. I don't know his age, but she said, I gave a copy of your book to my mother because my father is coming back and he keeps raising the thermometer on the AC. So they have contact there. So she's been awakened, and I cover that in my first book, Spiritual Consciousness, A Personal Journey. So once you realize that we as a intergalactic species, which I believe we are, we may have been seeded here, I'm not sure, but I'm referred to by my ET guides as part of their extended family, like we would have an uncle or an aunt, only I'm here in the third dimension and they're in the fifth dimension. And again, just those vibrational frequencies that separate us.
Exactly, and that's another interesting point that we can kind of wrap up this episode with. We've talked about the different dimensions. We've talked about the different parallels in previous episodes, and we also talk about it in our book. So to just kind of wrap this all up with today's topic on holographic universe, Edgar, how would you still explain the fact that we still have these parallels, we still have these dimensions, 12 dimensions, and how does that still fit into possibly this theory that we've talked about today of a holographic universe? Does it still apply?
It still applies because we are vibrational energy. We are equivalent to radio frequencies on many different levels. And it's like the old radios and the old TVs that we used to turn the dial and adjust that capacitor that was inside that circuit, changes the resonance of that circuit, you pull it in a new station. We're no different, and we can do it that quick.
Wow. So then that kind of brings me to a funny thought that came across my head just now. If this is an alien holographic universe, are we part of their reality show? I mean, think about it. Are we like, I don't know, The Young and the Restless? Are we like Days of Our Lives? I mean, what's the purpose of...
Are we the Truman Show?
Are we the Truman Show?
For the intergalactic.
Yes. I mean, what is the purpose? And other than the obvious of maybe control, there's probably several other explanations that we could talk about as far as why an alien race would want a holographic version of Earth. Is it to bring us back, reincarnate us over and over into this kind of slave state, this prison planet. And if that's the case, why? Why? Is it to keep us, kind of submersed in this lower vibration, this lower dimension, so that we never realize what's truly out there, so we never become a threat, so we never become, competition for them? I mean, I think that could be a strong possibility. This whole notion is just so mind-blowing because none of us have been raised to think like this. This is really out there, and I know some of you are at home thinking, okay, Melisa, you're really out there today. But am I really? I mean, like I've made this several points. Is this really out there? Because more and more I'm starting to think it's not out there, and it's actually a very strong possibility that it's real.
I think that we're possibly here to learn. It's a learning experience. It's like being in school. Mm-hmm. We have this physical, because we're really higher conscious beings ourselves. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. So we come down here to have that human physical experience.
The human experience, and kind of learn a lesson, so to speak.
To learn a lesson, to grow, and grow spiritually as well. So we expand our consciousness. We keep coming back to consciousness, don't we?
We do.
That seems to be the key.
We really do.
Whether it's holographic or not, these are open questions for people to think about.
I just wonder how many more lessons do I need to learn? Because I feel like I keep learning.
The Ascended Masters had to go through many trials and tribulations to get to where they were the Ascended Masters. They broke through, and now they're, they have the option of doing anything they want.
And I think that's so cool because, if you follow that thought of raising our vibration to become an Ascended Master, then, like you said, you can lower your vibration, lower your dimension, and come back and actually experience Earth as a human again. I don't know if you would want to, but I suppose you could. Maybe you miss certain aspects of being human, which kind of brings me to another point I want to make. Maybe we need to start embracing the fact that we're human instead of dividing us as humans, and actually start thinking of things on an intergalactic level instead of a very small level, and get out of this rut that we're in and start loving one another as humans and start embracing our planet, whether it's holographic or not. Still love it, still protect it, still nurture it. And if we start to have that mindset and we start to come from a place of our heart rather than a place of labels, then perhaps we could change the world. We each have about a minute to have a closing thought. Edgar, I'm going to go to you. What are your closing thoughts on today's topic?
Well, as we raise our vibrational levels through meditation, and we can manifest anything that we desire, but we have to think about what is it that will be for the greater good of not only us, but a fellow man.
Excellent.
Very good. Kevin, what are your closing thoughts?
I agree. I always seem to agree with you, don't I? I would say that, yes, we need to come together collectively as a species, as a human species. And I believe that that has happened already because of the virus itself. It brought us together as a human species for the first time in our history. We're all thinking about the virus collectively, okay? Could it be the 100 monkeys or it's the virus? It's brought us together. So now we need to expand on that, and now we understand that we can create our reality using thought and consciousness. And the bonus side to that is that the ETs are already here. They're willing to assist in that evolution, and we will co-create that new society together, because our society at the moment is crumbling, and it's been divided now, and every time that something new comes out about the virus, it divides the communities. We need to come together. We've got the no mask wearers, the mask wearers. We need to come together collectively. And when we do that, then we'll change our reality.
Absolutely. And I think once we, get rid of the dividing labels, whether it's, the race, the social, the economic, the political, the religious, the country, whatever dividing label that we seem to be using, once we get rid of that, and then we start thinking of ourselves as humans, as an intergalactic race, and we embrace the notion that we are more than just the labels. The labels have got to go. And then we can start expanding our mind and become awakened to this universal consciousness. Break out of this perceived reality, which is one that is highly negative at the moment. If we can break out of that, break into a more loving, peaceful reality for our wonderful Earth, whether it's holographic or not, it's still our perceived reality. If we can break into a more positive mindset collectively, much like we just did with the pandemic, get rid of the dividing negativity, get rid of the comments, get rid of the bullying, get rid of the ridicule, and come together with our hearts and with our minds set on breaking free of this little tunnel vision, this little box that we've been shoved in, then perhaps we can make a difference. And with that notion, I want all of you to think about learning to open your mind and changing what you know so you can change where you go. I'll say that again. Change what you know, and you will change where you go. Thank you for watching the UFO Woman Show. I'm your host, Melisa Kennedy, and until next week, I want you all to keep looking up.